people are so afraid of being embarrassed. That in turn automatically starts manifesting into your ability to take risks, and that should go. And I think it started for me very young, in the sense that and I was a fairly good student until the point I failed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Say Again with me, Amrita Tripathi. I'm beyond delighted today to be featuring a wonderful guest, the CEO of HarperCollins India. Ananth Padmanabhan is also a photographer, a bibliophile, a dog lover, a published author, co-chair of Ficky's publishing committee. And Ananth, I dare say I can find many, many more things to add as descriptions, but we'll go as we go along. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. The one thing the most proud of is the dog lover, book reader, photographer. All the others are just collateral, as it were.
You know, it's so interesting because I know you feel this way about titles, which I'm going to come to in this conversation. But also, as a heads up to our viewers or listeners, Ananth has given my dog permission to disrupt us. Ruby's sitting here, and she can be a bit like, if
Absolutely.
she's not getting all the attention from all the humans,
Absolutely.
like
Or if
dogs.
she thinks the conversation is way too boring even for her, she might bark us out of the room. Yes.
The peanut gallery. But Anand, okay, let me start a little bit, with a little bit about you in terms of your journey. Of course, I know what I just said about titles and so on, but you've spent more than 3 decades in the books business, which really speaks to your love for books. Can you take us through how you started, though? I've always found that story really fascinating. You're CEO today, but more than 30 years ago, you started in a bookstore doing sales in the city that was then known as Madras, of course, Chennai, which would have been your first job, right?
On the shop floor, exactly. So, I grew up in a regular home. Dad was a banker, mom was a homemaker. We are three boys, and at that time there were only two of us you know, when we got into the love of books, as it were. So, my father's younger brother used to run a lending library, and the idea was that our pocket money was only allowed to be used to borrow books. So every Friday or Saturday, and Saturdays, I think because second Saturday, Dad's bank was on leave, and we would take the rickshaw to the library and sit there, and we 5 or 6 or 10 books. Those are all really allowed to borrow. So I think that, combined with the fact that my dad was a book reader, created this lifelong love for books. But that was the nice part of the story. Then I went into, obviously, all of us go to school. In my high school, and I've said this story before, I, ironically enough, failed my 12th standard math. And then I had to do what is called a compartmental exam. You take a break when you retry the exam. At that point, when I was preparing to do this paper again, simply because of my dislike for trigonometry, which is why I kind of flunked it, I suppose, I went to work at Landmark as an intern. And I said that I'm studying and I didn't have anywhere to go. Everybody I studied with had moved on to college anyway. And I said that since I've been around books, why don't I go to work in a bookshop? So I went to work at Landmark. This was 1st October 1992. I was 17. I was interviewed 4 times, but I started on the shop floor. I still remember, by shop floor, I mean, first week was working in the back office, unpacking cartons, putting the books into a computer system, and then coming back down and displaying them on the floor. The first carton I ever opened in my, who knew then that's going to be 32 years, was Pupul Jakar's Indira Gandhi was published in hardback at that time. And I still remember that, and I remember displaying Suitable Boy when it was still a hardback, and it started there. I didn't know then that it was going to be a career. It is just that as I worked in that flow, then I ended up working for 5 years. Long in the scheme of things for a 17-year-old, was that not only did I get to read a lot of books, not only did I discover a lot more books, but the fascination was that when how does a book get from wherever it's written, especially those days where lots of imported books, Indian writing and Indian publishing was not as big as we know it now, was how does it get to this bookshop? And then suddenly somebody walks in and says, do you have the new Daniel Steele or a Wilbur Smith or the new Jeffrey Archer? And all these people were still writing brand new books at those times, right? And that got me thinking, got me fascinated, then became an abiding love for books, uh, the business of books. And then my previous job started as a sales rep at Penguin Books. This was 97. And then I'm here now. So I've never looked back in that sense. It's always been, my life is one book at a time, if you can say that. But yeah.
That's incredible. So, as you said, it wasn't necessarily planned, But it's also interesting that you started as a reader and that you started as someone who loves
Yes,
books in the first
yes,
place.
yes. So you discover more and more books. It also taught me about the business of books, as it were, right from the beginning, which is that even now, whatever we do, the heart of book selling is if you walk into a bookshop, what's on display. There are books you pick up for cover because you already know the author's name, the books that talk to you because they're sitting on the shelf. You walk in and ask for a recommendation, so the guy gives you the right book. And then, so I had to also read up. I had to get understand how genres work, what's working, what's not, and then be able to recommend more and more books. And that just became one after the other. And then the as I understood it more, life became more than a bookshop to what is the country reading. And so I just
Yeah. Well, what is the country reading? You're best placed to tell us what are some of the trends. I think, and also I want to ask you this as a two-part thing because I don't know how long I mean, I've known you for almost 20 years now. I think I started as a
yes,
journalist about 20 years ago. And, every few years you hear about the death of the book or the death of the novel or people are not reading. And this seems to be like a conversation that keeps coming in cycles. So you're the best place to tell us, are people reading? What are they reading in this country?
so I'll start with the second question first. What at this moment the hottest is why romanticism. uh, Young girls are reading truckloads of romantasy, racy fiction, in that sense. And there's lots of authors, Holly Jackson, Colin Hoover, and the ilk. Many girls are reading a lot more than they ever did. And I think it's an interesting point to segue into why, in a country like ours, one, there's never been the death of the book, but there have been tipping points, as it were. And the largest tipping point was Harry Potter 25 years ago, which drove literally everybody to a bookshop, and which was a big pivotal moment in India's reading journey. In those days, in the prior to a big moment like Harry Potter, you had Archie's had its own market, the comics had its own market, and then people were discovering a few other writers' books and so on. This one drove everybody of every age group to go into a bookshop, and then started off. Plus, of course, the Booker Prize winning Indian writers and so on. So everybody's been reading things. 50 Shades of Grey, Twilight, Colleen Hoover, Dan Brown, Amish Tripathi, Chetan Bhagat. We've had these pivotal points when it drove customers who are just one book readers or not, but they've always come. Is there a death of the book? Simple answer is no. We have been in India, I won't go too far back, in the last 25 years, a continuous double digit growth of the industry, which obviously naturally translates to more people are reading books, more people are buying books, more people are reading books. That's the
And
simple answer.
you were telling me this is a like multi-billion-dollar industry. Can you give us some of the numbers again? Because it's not something we see
No,
reflected.
so the publishing industry, which includes academic as well as a country, so I'm going to start at the top. We are a over $12 billion industry, which is massive. We
That's
employ more
huge.
than 1 million people in its value chain. So the number of people who, and this is just people who work in publishing, I'm not including the writers, the people who work in publishing and the entire value chain, retail, distribution, warehousing, all the associate services, everything is over $12 billion. It is natural that the country of our size, 95% is education. People who are in any form of organized education, school, college, higher ed, and other learning. 300 million of those are kids in schools between pre-primary and class 12, which also is a very big number. The natural extension is that children's books are massive in our country, price, quality, purpose notwithstanding. And the trade business, what we call general books, fiction, non-fiction, academic, non-academic, and then entertainment, that's about 5% of that $12 billion business. So it's pretty massive.
That's huge.
Lots of books. I mean, the days of 10,000 copy bestsellers are long gone. If you now have a really good book, you should aim to sell 100,000 copies of it and maybe more. Amish sells 250,000 copies for us when he puts out a new novel. And there are many successes like that. Our new Ratan Tata biography will be what, 50,000 copies. So the sky is the limit, as it were. The market has broken the format, the price, the genre, the category norms as they used to be. If it's a really good book, the invasive power of the internet has meant that more people are discovering more books much faster than ever before.
Oh, so let me ask you on that note, because we do hear from, and you travel across the country extensively, talking to everyone along this whole supply chain, the value chain that this $12 billion industry entails. Not numbers, as I was saying, that we're very aware of. I think it's not really reported as much. when you're traveling around the country, when you hear from booksellers, like, one of the things you're talking about earlier is like when you walk into a bookstore and you see what's displayed. Of course, the big challenge has been, you know, equally wonderful for readers as option is to be able to buy online, right? And the deep discounting, etc. How do you look at that? Because I mean, you do hear from smaller booksellers that this is actually pretty awful for business for them because of the deep discounting and people will walk in, get recommendations, and then go online. Or
But
do you think
I think that was the thing of the past. So now 5 out of 10 books are bought in bookshops. They're not bought online.
in
A,
India,
B,
5 out of 10?
in India. Yeah. And B, there's no deep discounting anymore. There's a time and a purpose when customer acquisition through books was the easiest way to get a customer for online platforms, and then to sell you more expensive things that you don't need. It's easy to sell you a 250 rupee book and get the customer. But now that's not the case anymore. I think uh, Crossword is India's largest bookstore chain, 106 stores, and doing pretty phenomenally well. And I know that they have 3x their revenue over the last 5 years. People discover books in bookshops. People are able to find what next to read in bookshops. If you know what you want, you'll probably go online. Now, if you're
Hmm.
specifically looking for a deal, you'll go online. But if you segment the market into two, one is people who regularly read books all the time. They are the people who are always going into bookshops, finding new things, finding new books to buy. On the occasion, they might be ordering online, but online as a print. They're not ordering as much ebooks and audiobooks in India. But children's, adult fiction, adult non-fiction, a lot of sales happens through bookstores, especially children's, where the parent has to see the book. There's the tactile feel for the child. Children want to see the books as well before they buy it for them. So bookstores are thriving. Now the question is, in any business model, no two
Hmm.
restaurants perform alike. In any shopping market, no two locations within a same space perform alike. Models are not like in foreign countries where bookstores are anchor stores. I mean, there's a coffee shop nearby, and a big Barnes and Noble or a big Waterstones will be, or a Foils will be like the fulcrum of that community business, as it were. We don't have that. We went from small independent to chain stores to books within malls, and then the bookshops in malls are now pulling back because it's just very, very expensive to be there. But you take the Delhi example of Bari Sons. You take the
Yeah.
you take the bookshops in Fort. You take you know Bookworm in Bangalore, all thriving.
Yeah.
You need
And then,
to. I
like,
think
they're starting, do you feel like they're starting to become hubs of community like Champaka in Bangalore, Kunzum in Delhi, like trying to create this?
that's where I was heading, in the sense that as a bookshop, it's so important, not just as a bookshop, even as a publisher, it's so important to understand the readership, the community. Who are you selling books to? What are you selling books for? And so on and so forth. That active engagement has to happen.
Hmm. Okay, well, I could ask you things about this forever, but for my other like author friends, I would like to ask you two pronged question as well. You've been an author yourself. You're a publisher. You understand the books business like no one else. What are some of your tips for authors of fiction versus non-fiction? And I know this is going to be very different for a first time author versus someone who has a few titles out. But because it's very easy to get swept away in the white noise around this industry. If you had one or two tips for authors today to position themselves better, perhaps. And we're presuming talent in a good book, right? Like presuming you've written a good book.
Yeah.
What would your tips be? And
The good, yeah, you're going to get me in trouble here, but we'll come to the good later.
yeah.
Like if you want to start photography, you need a camera. I'm not saying you need a high-end camera or a low-end camera. You need a
Mm,
device to be able to do that. So a certain mastery over language is very important, fundamental. That's basic given, right? But I think one, read a lot. I think a lot more people are wanting to write before they've read enough. uh, Read, very important. Read across genre, not just because you're going to write a certain genre you read it. Don't A lot of authors say that I don't read when I'm writing and so on. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. You can continue to read what you want to read when you're reading. Maybe you want to read non-fiction when you're writing fiction, or vice versa, but definitely read a lot. Two, share the book with about 5 people that whose opinion you trust, and then take criticism. And when you're writing, so this preludes the sharing, is be compulsive. Don't force yourself into writing something just because you wanted to do something, and don't be in a hurry to write it. I mean, if it's compulsive, yes. If you're not able to, stop and pause. Don't rush it. It's very easy to see things happen. And then there is obviously the craft. This is not an MFA class. Your characters have to work. As
Yeah.
a reader, I have to be invested in the predicaments of the people inside it. I have to be able to taste their food. I have to be able to walk their walk, and it needs to connect with me at some level to say I'm interested in the life or the stories that you're saying. uh, because that's where binge writing comes from. Every crime novel, whether it's a who done it or a how done it, people die and there's a bad guy or a woman and so on and so forth. But
Mm.
why should I read the book beyond the first page? Is I'm able to create a world where the reader is interested in what's going to happen and is going to
Yeah.
turn the page. These are very important. And don't rush a book ever. Don't
No,
rush a book.
yeah. I should have spoken to you before my first book. I had a deadline in my head that before 30, I want a book out.
No,
But
no, no.
were you able to use these tips for yourself when you were writing as an author? Or would you have separate ideas of what works?
I started saying I'm going to do 60,000 words, and I think I did 65,000 words. I knew what I was going to write. This is what I suppose every author will say. But I literally had an Excel sheet of each of those scenes and each of those moments. In some instances, I had the last line of a particular chapter pop, and I knew I had to write the chapter back. But the thing that I did is, I think which I suppose is a useful trip, that I didn't wait for a moment to write when I wrote. I didn't say I'm going to come back home, remember all these things, keep notes elsewhere, and then come and sit down and write it. Sure it works for many writers, and maybe that's the way it's supposed to be done. But I would send myself voice notes. I would message myself if something pops. I would stop and then send myself an email if there is what I wanted to write. And then when the moment came, I would write. And I didn't write chronologically. I knew that this was what's going to happen in the last chapter. And then I knew that I was heading the direction. Of course, characters take on their own lives. Sometimes you're stuck in the middle, and then you have to undo it. Of course, I've trashed chapters and so on. But I wrote as I felt compulsive. And if it didn't work for me to begin with, then I would just, heartlessly trash. But
Yeah, I think.
I sent it
Oh,
to
you sent
five
it.
people. I sent it to five. I mean, imagine my colleague and peer group base. It takes great courage to kind of write the novel I
Yeah.
wrote and then send it out and take feedback. But I did. I mean, I
Yeah.
trusted the feedback. I also told them that I'm not going to take this feedback because that's the nature of the beast. And you must know that your characters. It's one thing to say the character takes his life and runs away from you, but you are in control of your characters' lives. They will do something or they will not do something.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
that is uncharacteristic for your character to
Yeah.
say something or do something. It's not all wild and free, as it
Exactly.
were. you need
It's
you
sort of
need
the
a
rules of the universe you might have created, right? They operate according to and their own
yes.
personalities if you've developed it right.
So that's an important thing as well. And those distinctions start to appear. That it's important that you create individual personalities quite like who they are, and they're no different on paper as there are people around you. So one of those other tips is to just be a very keen observer of the world around you, of people. And a lot of books I think fail as well is because the description overpowers simple conversations between people. And the thing that screens do more than books is that two people can be sitting very quietly next to each other somewhere, not saying a word. It's very hard to say that on a piece of paper, but that also is a movement for the narrative. So watch the world around you. I think is so important to write anything
That's so
of the
interesting.
world.
And I'm actually going to use that to segue a little bit to, the your own journey, which we've already talked about a little bit. But when you talk about observing the world around you, tell us a little bit about your photography. It's never struck me to ask you this before. You've been such an avid photographer. What is it about observing? What is it about photography that you love?
I think it started early too, but it's the moment. I'm a big fan of. I do obviously there's nature photography, but a big fan of street photography and still life. And it's that you can call it selfish. You see something and you want to capture it forever. Of course, skill notwithstanding, you have to learn. You have to do the stuff that requires. You have to learn to read light, read composition. It's not all free and wild to make a beautiful image. But when I saw something, I wanted to keep it. I think it started there. It started with photographing motorcycles as a young child, and then travel pictures when we went out on a holiday on borrowed cameras. And then as it went ahead, Then I wanted to record moments. I think, I suppose, primarily for myself, because I'm not a shown photographer, unlike there's only one or two exhibitions, but to keep them for me, and to think that that moment will change. Light changes in seconds, right? You step in to pull on your jacket and come back out, it's evening in London or something. That thing that you saw disappears. So if you're right there, and a lot of successful photography is that recognizing that very moment and capturing it. And then phones have come a long way, in which you don't have to carry a heavy equipment around and worry about setting. You see what you want, and you then hold on to it. And I think all of us see a lot. I think all
Yeah.
of us recognize a lot. So you are remembering that you saw this fantastic moment at some point. A child playing, or a dog jumping, or this real swoosh of a yellow color of a cab in Calcutta. You saw it too. The need to, whether you want to take a picture of it and keep it, or to call yourself a photographer and take that shot in a particular way, I say, separates people. But if phones have changed it, I think a lot more people are making beautiful photographs, almost disrupting the professional photography versus photography. And the more we recognize the world around us,
Yeah.
the better we see it. Yeah, yeah.
I love that. So poetic. I was going to say also, and this is clearly my temperament, a lot of us take really crappy photos also, but they stand for something. I think you're taking it for yourself, that moment,
Yes,
right?
yes, and I say exactly. The moment. So I say this often. I might be called completely impatient at home, which I'm not. But anyway, we all have to pause. Things spin past us so fast. And the greatest joy of being not just being in publishing, but also being a book reader, is that it's such a zero carbon, solitary, slow living existence. One teaches you to be with yourself. And then you're immersing yourself in somebody else's life, or somebody else's research, or some other subject. If I suddenly want to read astrophysics, it's a thing that I don't know anything about, but it's extremely solitary. I'm not bothering anyone. I don't have to talk to anyone. The person that I'm spending most of the time is myself. But I've paused a moment. And I think one of the greatest things about being book readers, if you are one, is that you understand that solitary existence and that moment, and which it doesn't happen as often as it should in everybody's lives. The more we pause, I
Yeah.
think it's a slightly more slower, nicer, quieter, calmer world.
I love that. And I want to ask you a little bit about how all of these strands of your identity, when which gets center stage, because you're also running a very successful business. But for a second, I want to ask you, on
Yeah.
that sort of point note, that beautiful interview you did with the little yellow beetle, where you say, in response to a question from Malika Bajaj, you say, nothing in the world is as important as being kind. I just
Yes.
highlighted that for myself because that's such a fantastic, it's not something you really hear from business leaders as much. Can you expand on that a little bit and what you mean? And you're talking
But
about
so,
all walks
so
of life, right?
yes, yes. So I don't use, like I told you the other day as well. In general, I don't use the word business leader and all of that. It's a job, and the job, everything that we do, however small, however large, accountability, responsibility notwithstanding, um, it is human. And even more so in publishing, because we are only, as they say, we are a kind of a medium. Somebody who's highly creative has written a fantastic book, or a poem, or taken a photograph which might become a book, and so on. We have the skill to take a look at it and say, okay, this will interest many other people. We are mediums. You learn to appreciate the creativity of another person. You learn to appreciate, assess the need for entertainment and creativity for another person. And you're just making this thing in between as a book and selling it to them. That's part of the business. Does my business require clinical decisions? Is publishing a profit making business? Yes. Does it entail making very hard decisions? And we are a very large organization, as you said. We are not small. We are both in trade and general publishing. We are also in about 6,000 schools. 6 million kids use our textbooks. That's a beast in itself. We do all of that. But at the heart of everything we do, at least in HarperCollins, is respect creativity, invest in ideas, have an ability to take risks, but you have to be kind through this process, because everything that we do is creative. Whether we are in a classroom somewhere in Bangalore, you know 80 children, 3 teachers, and telling them how important comprehension and communication is. I am selling an English textbook, but I'm selling the purpose over and above the fact that I'm selling a textbook that needs to be taught. We have to teach how it's to be taught to the child, whether the child is assimilating that or not. Same when we appear when we work with people. I mean, there are two sets of people in an organization, especially in publishing. The right brain, as it were, our entire creative enterprise, editors, marketeers, everybody who's doing digital and so on, super creative because you have to do it by the minute. And then there is the clunky parts, which is the operation side of it, warehousing, shipping, finances. Are we collecting money on time and so on and so forth? But you can apply creative in all of these places, but you have to be kind through the entire process because we're dealing with humans all the time. We are not in a bot world yet. And humans bring their own motivations, their own misgivings, their own, unhappiness is a hard word, but everybody's dealing with a lot. You could say that when you step into the office, you need to create an environment that is appreciative of the fact that everything that happens to you outside the office significantly determines your success in the office.
And you acknowledge that. And I think, I know you said you don't like the titles and the jargon, but in terms of like leadership, empathy, kindness, creating that kind of space where everyone can thrive, these are things that we're hearing a lot. How hard is it to, one, put that into practice? And then I want to ask you a little bit about what success means for you. And coming back to that first thing you shared, you shared with people about failing in class 12. That's such a big moment for any young person. And how that has shaped your outlook on success or failure. What was, how important was it for you to have your family support, or anyone supporting you at that time? Can you take us through a little bit of success, failure, and how we show up for each other, even in a workplace?
Even in the workplace, I'll start. Your first question was the workplace. I think one is uh, transparency is so important. The communication transparency is so important in setting the tone in any kind of office discussion. Therefore, people are not afraid to say what they want to say. People are not afraid to challenge each other. In publishing, the author and their work, the purpose of why we are meeting, uh, takes precedence over anybody else's. And I very rarely use this word, individuals' egos, if they exist at all. We're all together because we've come together as a team, respecting the skills that each of us bring to the table for that purpose. The communication is absolutely transparent. Anybody is allowed to say anything they want as long as we are doing it to achieve something together. If we respect each other, acknowledge the fact that each of us are different and are bringing different skills for this combined purpose, I think more often than not we'll find that the working culture is great, and people love to come here and not uh, embarrassed to be wrong, uh, and so on. But I'm also a driver, a relentless driver. One of my, you're saying what is success or whatever it is. I don't give up. I never give up. That's one of those things I taught myself. I'm Embarrassment sometimes cripples people. People are so afraid of being embarrassed. That in turn automatically starts manifesting into your ability to take risks. You don't want to do anything because you're just so embarrassed, and that should go. And I think it started for me very young, in the sense that and I was a fairly good student until the point I failed. Like one day I wasn't, and one day I was. So parents were like, "This is fine. This is absolutely fine. You always have a second chance." When I said unusually, I got up and everybody in my class was already in college. And in those days, in the 90s, you were only pursuing to be a doctor or an engineer. There were no other higher ed things. You could be a lawyer. My elder brother is a lawyer, for example. But when I said I'm going to work in a bookshop, the entire greater family said, "Why is he working in a shop?" They didn't think books were anything, right? They didn't think reading was anything. Everybody was reading. Madras reads a lot anyway. And Higginbotham's has been a bookshop for a very long time. That's where I bought my children's books. But parents were like, "You do what you want. And you fuck up, come back home. We're here." That's the thing. And that still holds true. If
Yeah.
you are if you get rid of that fear of embarrassment, life becomes a lot different. And then never give up. Never give up. And success in publishing, I would say, do not ignore the reader. A lot of publishing experiments fail because you think they should be reading that. It's not often true. Um, you have to have a right mix between what people are reading, how tastes are changing, what are the age group and demographic of what is happening, what trends are internet setting, and so on and so forth. and your publishing should reflect that. And that includes in nonfiction. If there are important books to be published, like being Muslim in Hindu India, you have to publish it. That's a good at the moment to publish books like that, or HPOP and so on.
Yeah.
Never ignore the readership.
It's incredible that you were able to get up and move on, also because your parents were like, you can always come back home, right? Like, this is not the end of the world. That's such a
This is
huge and
beautiful. And
empowering.
it's so important to be taught in school. I think one of the things that's happening,
Yeah.
and we're also seeing a lot is changing even at the school level, because the teacher literally has the most significant impact on a child's life. Now, one would say, Mata, Pita, Guru, Devam, or whatever, God comes last. But parents now are so busy by and large, on that rat race, as it were. If a child is safely able to go to a very good school, has a device to be connected with, comes back home and goes to tuition and then learns music and so on, they've created this world of what is called teaching environment for the child across every aspect. And there's very little interaction with the child itself. We meet a lot of parents who are not able to assess. So give them a book. They often say, "You think my 6-year-old can read this?" So the ability to judge whether the child can read something or not is also lacking, because the parent themselves are not a reader. It's not like the past anymore. So what the teacher says beyond a report card about what the child's ability is so significant. And teachers often are under pressure in this environment to only create stars. As a
Yeah.
consequence, slow learners or divergent learners who don't want to learn math and science, who want to learn art, who want to learn music, who might want to be a dancer or whatever, are curbed and tried to be beaten into learning only what we know, because the exam is at the end of the month or the quarter or the year and so on. So a lot of that has to happen right at the school level, which is to
Yeah.
say, exposing the child to various other scenarios, that there is a world beyond just your exam, and it's absolutely okay to fail. And I
Yeah.
think another thing that's dropping dramatically is number of children in sport. Schools, we don't have schools with playgrounds as much as they used to be. There are smaller schools, so you don't learn failure from sport. And sport, I think, is such a leveler, such an important leveler, where you can't happy with your last match success. You have to do it again and again every time. uh, we have to teach kids that failure is not the end all of everything,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
then these kids come with this wrong notion of being overprotected at home, not being told the truth when they're going through schools. And don't fail a child and class 8 is a bit of a bummer, I think. And then added disadvantage of not being a reader. So you have absolutely zero empathy to the rest of the world, because you've not experienced anybody else's life. You run this kind of unilateral life, as it were. And then you come into a work environment where nobody has to listen to what you have to say, because they're all thinking about that the next PNL or the next success story or the next big bash or the next big product launch or whatever. And you just left halfway through and you're feeling lost already, that why am I not able to connect to the people around me, because these things have not been told to you when you needed to know them.
Yeah. So then the shock to the system is that much more, is what you're
Yeah.
saying. Interesting. I hope some parents are listening to this, and teachers as well, because Ananth, I know Malika dubbed you International Kindness Minister, which is wonderful. I think it's a great title from that last interview. We're going to tag her. I think also this seeing more of these kind of trajectories where you're like literally able to talk about this openly without being embarrassed yourself, saying I failed class 12. Look at where you are, even if you don't care about the designation, but look at where you've reached. For parents, that will be very important. He's now a CEO.
No,
I'm
no, yeah,
hoping.
I suppose it's hard work. I've had kind people to work with, a lot of people to learn from constantly, and that wasn't the stop, right? Yes, I did that. I put in decades being a sales guy. I went to study at Stanford. I learned publishing because I thought there was a time in which I needed to know the industry properly. So in 2004, I did my publishing course in Stanford. In 2010, after having been in publishing and in senior management for a very long time, I went and signed up for a senior management course at IIM Ahmedabad for it's a 30-day intensive program, and literally threw myself into an environment where I heard, I didn't come with an MBA or engineering degree or anything, and sat in a classroom full of CEOs, senior vice presidents from Nokia and Ashok Leyland and all of those places who knew statistics like the back of their hand. And there I am sitting, enjoying my turn of phrase in my last novel I read kind of situation. But also threw myself in an environment where I was completely uncomfortable, was totally new. Because if you have to, if you have to be a Roman, you'll have to study these things, right? So I had to do that. So yes, I did educate myself along the way, relevant, appropriate education as it went along.
And it's interesting you say that, because in that startup space, there's always that thing of like, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. So this thing of like lifelong learning and upskilling and all the jargon that comes with it. You've been, as you said, persevering, studying what you want to. I can hear some dogs. I apologize.
Good.
Really bored with the studying conversation now. She's like, both ho gaya. But I think one of the interesting things you said is that you also never gave up. So as we're winding down this interview, if you had a message to your younger self now, the 15-year-old, the 16-year-old, the 17-year-old who's kicked off this career and didn't realize in 32 years he's going to be, still in publishing at one of the highest, possible positions, but also all those other strands of your identity, what would your message be to your younger self?
I I said thank God for being a book reader. I think that's one habit that had the single most significant impact on my life. The fact that
Oh,
you read fiction, especially fiction. You were open to you was open to so much more. I think readers are different from non-readers, and I believe that
yeah.
that made a significant difference to my life. And it taught me that there's a world beyond. It introduced me to different people, put me in different geographies, put me in different situations around the world as well, put me in different rooms talking to different people. Uh, because I was reading books and I thought, okay, we're going to sell a lot more books, help me understand the writer and the reader. And then, of course, when you take on a job and it becomes your business, you have to make sure that you want to make money off it. So that one decision, um, that fellow a long time ago did, I don't want to meet him again, long time ago did, was to and it's thanks to my parents, all of that, to become a reader was the single most important decision, I think, that
I
changed
love
my
that.
life.
And if final question, then, if you were to share something you're grateful for, we sometimes wind down with gratitude. This could include mentors or advisors. It could include anything you've done. What are you grateful for today?
Oh, big question. You're grateful every moment that you're alive. But I think a life with dogs is what I am most grateful for. As a child, I grew up in a house full of dogs, and then all through now, and they teach you to rewind and refresh life every 5 seconds. They teach you what's important, and as somebody who's experienced love from another animal, especially a dog, I think that's something that I will always be grateful for. I think it changes people from the inside, and that's something nobody else can. Your parents will love you; they have no other choice but to love you. But for another creature to show you unconditional love,
That's beautiful. I love that. On behalf of all other dog lovers and people owned by dogs, thank you for that. Thank you for taking out the time today. And we're going to be obviously in touch, and talking about many more things. Ananth Padmanabhan on Say Again. We'll also bring some comments to you as they come in, hopefully after this. Thank you so much.
thank you for having me on your show. Thank you.